Okay, anti-Kantavad video. Anyway, so he's doing a rationalization of procreation against the argumentation that it is a act of recklessness, controllable recklessness. That would be the argument, and therefore it's comparable to drunk driving in terms of it being an unethical act if incompetence is being recklessly created. Yeah. Anyway, we'll start over from the beginning. It's pathetic.
If I take the contents of this bottle, this wine bottle, and drink it, and then I take the contents of one or two more of those bottles and then drink it, and then I go and get...
Okay, so yeah, we're going to have to go through this. I'm going to play the whole video, so I'll just throw in some other commentary while he builds up to his narrative. So the fundamental, the end game argument is that we have a nature, and so it's our nature to be drunk, technically. And so we can't be blamed for that drunkenness, or the desire to drive. Let's say the desire to drive is natural. Now, there's no way he can do this. Okay, there's two components. There's first your responsibility when driving, and then there's your responsibility to maintain your competence while driving. And in both cases, he's an advocate either for endorsing your desire that may be inappropriate, which is procreating in itself is sort of inappropriate in terms of it's intrinsically impositional. But beyond that, you do it in this reckless frame of mind where he has just previously made a video where he's implying that somehow it is wrong to consider the death, the welfare of your child, to actually think and contemplate about the possibilities that procreation might implicate, the fact that your child might be born without arms or something. It's somehow inappropriate to think through all those negative potential outcomes because that's somehow guilting yourself into a decision or something like that. So here he has basically said he has endorsed the drunkenness, which is ignorance. Isn't that the drunkenness? Drunkenness is the lack of understanding that there is a consequence, a responsibility. Right? Isn't that what drunk driving is a way of dissolving or removing responsibility when you're on the highway to be as competent as possible to do things that minimize risk, minimize potential harm to innocent victims other than yourself, that you're not on the road by yourself? Isn't that the whole friggin' point? And it's the drunk who doesn't acknowledge those circumstances anymore? Yeah.
Behind the wheel of my car. The assumption is that I'm not fit to drive, that what I'm doing is unethical, I suppose.
You're creating an unnecessary risk. That's the point, right? It's just a totally unnecessary risk. It's an elevation of the risk potential that socially we don't gain any benefit from. We don't gain near enough benefit. Your convenience isn't nearly enough of a benefit to justify the risk.
I'm doing something that sets me apart from all the other drivers on the road, in theory at least.
Right, in that the other drivers are being held to some responsibility to minimize risk, not maximize risk. That's right.
In theory, all the drivers on the road are sober, except me, because we have laws and we have social mores that say you are not supposed to drink and drive. That I had the option of not consuming any of this before I got behind the wheel of the car. I was not in any way impaired or...
Yeah, kind of like the option to wear a condom. Yeah, the option to have money in the bank. Yeah, the option to do to build a nest before you lay an egg. Yeah, you do have that option.
At least any more impaired than anyone else. until I consciously reached for the bottle, poured myself umpteen glasses of wine, and poured them down my gizzard. That separates me from all the other drivers on the road, who are, presumably, not drunk, in theory.
Well, yeah, not impaired through volition, through some act that is preventable. That they would have a sense of responsibility not to heighten the risk unnecessarily to the welfare of all the other people on the road. And that it's just a basic contract. Yes, not complicated. It's called ethics.
I had the option of not drinking that quantity of wine. I wasn't born.
Yeah, just like you have the options before having sex of saying, have I created a mechanism to prevent pregnancy? We know that sex and procreation are not the same thing. We know that most people don't have 18 children because they figure it out eventually, right? They can certainly control it when they really want to. That's what they've demonstrated. I don't have to procreate unless I really want to, because people have demonstrated the capacity not to procreate when they really want to not procreate.
Born drunk. I wasn't born impaired and incapable of driving. The metaphor, if you ask me, does not wash.
So, yeah, but you're not born with any, number one, your argument that you're born with a desire to procreate, I think, is fallacious as science, okay? I think biology demonstrates that there is no innate desire in males to procreate, and that that's a cultural manifestation. That's your ego being conditioned to think that this is something like a shiny Lamborghini is a shiny child kind of thing, but you don't have a desire to procreate. You have a desire to have sex. Just like salmon aren't making babies, and lions aren't making babies, and elephants, and nobody's making babies on purpose in nature, and neither are humans when they have sex. And you're not acknowledging that simple piece of biology, and you keep talking as if sex and procreation are the same thing, and they have absolutely nothing to do with each other unless you allow them to have something to do with each other.
Because in the drunk driving metaphor, I am implicit in my own impairment.
The impairment here is completely perceptual, and again, you've argued for impairment. You've argued that people shouldn't look at the risk. They shouldn't focus on the risk, that they should only look at for positive potentials and never look for the consequential negative potentials. And they certainly shouldn't analyze them in any kind of equal proportion. So you've advocated for a kind of mental drunkenness in terms of this whole conversation where you've denied the biological imperative as sex and not procreation. That's a kind of drunkenness. You've perverted and distorted and bent and twisted the truth, and it was same as a liquor. And just like the opiate of the masses, religion.
I am actually, because of my choices, I am actually implicit in being a menace. Or at least being more of a menace than everybody else. Even a crashing hardcore alcoholic can take the necessary steps to avoid drinking and driving.
Well, I don't even know if that's true, though. Once they're caught up in the psychosis of their alcoholism, their panic and their need for the booze is so strong that they will drink and drive to get more stuff to drink. So, unfortunately, I've seen that too many times. Well, I've seen it twice, and that was too many times.
But I presumably had the option of not getting hammered, or if I did get hammered, I had the option of not driving.
You certainly had knowledge. You certainly had more than enough opportunity to acquire the knowledge that you're opening a risk bottle if you haven't taken precautions, if you haven't put a condom on your car or yourself to prevent yourself from getting into the car and prevented the consequential impact, if you haven't given the keys to somebody else because you're going to do something irrational in your drunken state, then yes, you have been irresponsible as soon as you open the bottle. But obviously you can get drunk in your living room and it's have no consequence if you're not going to drive.
The procreation is drunk driving metaphor falls down for that reason.
Sorry, no sale.
Because we had the option of not being drunk.
Right, and you have the option of recognizing the rational truth that procreation and sex are not the same thing. One thing is a willful decision that, you know, for whatever reason you think you have a right to impose on something, and you have to take responsibility for that decision. That's driving. Is taking responsibility, knowing the rules of the road, knowing what's the implications are. So I mean, you know, what comes with drunkenness is often speeding and other kinds of falling asleep and lots of other things that create the actual destruction of somebody else's welfare. And likewise, in contemplating procreation, if you're not going to contemplate it for its true implications, then that's a kind of drunkenness. It's kind of irresponsibility. It's like not knowing the difference between your left and your right, or not knowing how to read the signs.
The bit of volition that is examined and condemned in the procreation is drunk driving is the driving part.
By his rationalization here, right? Let's say you were, through conditioning, you were turned into a pedophile, right? You grew up a little weird, your mommy did the wrong things to your anus and whatever happened, but you end up a pedophile in terms of you desire to have sex with children. Now, I'm sure there's more. I'm sure 9 out of 10 pedophiles are probably in this position where they acknowledge the fact that this is an inappropriate sexual desire, and they attempt to find gratification without actually having to molest children, because they know molesting children is wrong. They not only know that it's against the law, but they know themselves that it's inappropriate for them to use a child in that manner, and that they're going to be exposing them, literally, to an imposition that they have no right to control their destiny that way, to fuck with their sexuality in that manner. And so they find some other way to gain their gratification, and that's called being responsible. You know, they're driven to it by a sense of obligation and a sense of honor. They're saying, I'm going to be better than my nature. There's no crime in saying I'm going to be better than the bad cards I've been dealt. And you know, to sit there and keep excusing bad behavior, what is that? All you're doing is making excuses to not acknowledge that there's aspects of our nature, selfishness for example, that are not good aspects. They're bad, they're negative aspects, and they need to be overcome. And they're not going to be overcome if you become comfortable and satisfied to be that way. And so what would you do? Pass a law that says it's okay for guys to molest kids? Is that what you would do? Because it's their nature?
How about the drunk part? Are we to be condemned for the drunk part? Because if we are to be...
Yeah, well, you're going to be condemned if the drunk part is because you're denying reality. Yeah, then that's going to be called being drunk. That's right. So if the drunk part is, I will not acknowledge the risk, I'll not explain how it's okay if I make a mess too big for me to clean up, that there is no undo button, that the mess is just going to be the mess and it's going to be stuck with it. I mean, if you're going to make rationalizations, again, for gambling with somebody else's money, that's what we're talking about here, so the other metaphors also do fit. Okay, but let's stick to the drunk driving one. You're heightening a risk. That's the fact. And you're doing it for your own gratification, for some convenience of your own. And so unless you have some other imperative besides your own satisfaction, unless there is some other rationale, some other excuse, like there's a fire or there's some reason why you're allowed to pretend you're God and not actually be God. I mean, how do you license yourself to procreate, right? Isn't that the argument? We're talking really about what impairs you from being competent. Well, what is competence to procreate? And it's certainly not saying, I'm going to behave like a flatworm. I'm going to do what every other dumb animal does, and not acknowledge the fact that I'm not a dumb animal. I mean, seems to be a critical flaw in the sense that you've basically said, who cares about knowing how to drive? So you're not even a drunk driver. You're a drunk driver who doesn't even know how to drive. You never took driving lessons, which is double the crime.
Condemned for the drunk part, then we should be condemned for not choosing to be sober. Okay? It might be my fault that I got behind the wheel of the car, and it might be my fault that I'm drunk. But if procreation is by its very nature unethical because it's the same thing as drunk driving,
procreation by its very nature is unethical. That's where you cross the line. The point is that it's not by its very nature unethical. It's unethical when you do it for bad reasons. When you participate in it based on delusions or nonsense or silliness. When you don't acknowledge the risk. All of those things are components of it. It's not by its nature. Well, it is sort of by its nature also a crime. I mean, it is an imposition. You can't undo the impositional nature of it. So, okay, let's stick with that then. I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, but yeah, okay, it is by its nature a crime to procreate. That's true. And the only way you can do it is through a rationalization, which is a perversion of the truth. So I guess I would argue that that's the drunkenness. You know you're not competent philosophically, right? What's your philosophical competence to impose life? Where did you get the authority again? Where's your license to drive?
That assumes that we have the option of not being drunk.
Alright, so his argument here is that we are made this way by nature, and therefore we have no option but to be obedient to our nature. And I think that's just clearly rubbish. We all the time moderate our nature, all the time. So, again, there's no argument here. We're completely in control of how compulsive, this compulsion.
I would submit that if we're going to actually use that antinatalist metaphor correctly, we would have to assume that every driver out there is drunk. And he doesn't, or she does not, have the option of not being drunk.
Not having the option of not being drunk. Well, again, we can see that the truth can't be what you just described, right? Because some people choose to have kids, some people choose not to have kids. Even people who choose to have kids find some point where they're able to not have kids. So, again, somehow the compulsion seems very conditional. And the very fact that the compulsion is very conditional is evidence that there's something that changes the condition, correct? So there's this condition where you don't have to drink and drive, and so if that condition exists, why not exist in that condition where you don't need to do it or don't want to do it?
Because if we're going to say procreation is drunk driving, then we're going to have to say anyone who ever procreates is in some sense drunk, right? Because...
Well, I mean, I'm okay with that, like I said, because obviously I think the only way you can willfully and deliberately play God is if you are drunk on arrogance, drunk on ego, drunk on some kind of personal I'm entitled bullshit that is in fact completely delusional. You might as well be as retarded as a drunk in terms of your perception having nothing to do with reality. You are incompetent by ignorance and delusion.
If driving under the influence is bad, then reproducing under the influence is bad. What is the influence that we're talking about here?
The influence would be you like drinking, okay, so let's say you like having sex. I don't know what the exact metaphor would be. And the distortion is the recklessness, the lack of risk averseness, the lack of respect for the negative implication potential the lack of respect for the potential harm that engaging in the activity will create, the heightened risk.
Driving under the influence has a clear cause. What's the influence in the antinatalist drunk driving metaphor?
Ego. Aggrandized psychology. Egomaniacal psychology. A lack of ignorance is the key one, right? You're just too stupid to put yourself in the maze and see how irresponsible the act actually is, in the context that this is not something, in the first place, this isn't a fire you should even be able to start. You shouldn't even have matches. And certainly you're not using the matches that have been put in your hand in any kind of informed consent way. You're using them in this reckless, sloppy way where you're just going to say, I want. And as we know, most people have just have little or no respect. Most people procreating. Isn't that the irony here? Most of the people actually procreating are the ones who have the least awareness of the implications and the hard responsibilities it imposes. And the people not procreating are the ones that do. Correct? So, I mean, obviously, the sensible, the non-drunk on ignorance and delusion find it perfectly survivable. They find life perfectly good. So this compulsion obviously isn't something as necessary as food or water.
One could say that it's just addiction. Okay. Is being an addict part of being human? Is it an ineradicable part of our nature?
Eradicable. See, again, you always change things into extremes that are just totally unnecessary. These are not our choices. The choice is, yes, we could say that any living thing is going to be addicted because it's going to be built on desire and need. Hunger is the very nature of the organism. But it's all changing what we're hungry for, right? You can want a car that gets you to work reliably, that's dependably efficient and is nice to the environment, or you can want a Lamborghini that is totally impractical, is likely to get somebody killed, and is a huge waste of natural resources. Clearly, these are things that can be wanted, that you can be addicted to. There's a good thing to be addicted to and a bad thing to be addicted to. Not complicated. You can be addicted to doing good in the world. You can be addicted to comforting people. Or you can be addicted to heroin. I mean, it's pretty easy to say, well, yeah, go with the helping people thing. That's a much better addiction.
Are there any humans who are not addicted? I would say no, there aren't. Even by the antinatalist definition. To exist is to be addicted.
Yes, to live is to be hungry. But what you eat is something we can control. It's within our ability to control what we eat. What we do to the world.
Is it part of our nature? I would say yes, it is. I can be blamed for putting this bottle to my lips and draining the contents down my throat. I have the option of not doing that. I don't have the option of not being a human being.
Well, that's not the question. Again, you're saying being a human being is procreating. And I'm going to argue quite obviously, I think, is that no, it's just a simple catch game that nature plays with you. Okay, there's no absolute connection again between sex and procreation. Even naturally, most births end in miscarriage. I mean, there's all kinds of mechanisms. There's all kinds of opportunity to have sex without procreation, and there's certainly nothing in psychology. Again, you're not going to be able to make the argument that most males are having sex thinking about the fact that they're making babies. I think that's just absolute nonsense. It's aberrant psychology for a male to be thinking about making babies while having sex.
Or I suppose one could say that I do have the option of not being a human being. But What would be
No, you have the option of not being an asshole, and that's what the subject is. So you can choose to be an asshole, or you can choose to be better than an asshole. Not complicated.
a proper motive for opting not to be a human being?
Not being a menace. Maximizing the efficiency of your existence. Realizing your potential. Your productivity potential. Yeah, cool. It's a great thing to do. Maximize your productivity potential.
Guilt, maybe?
Maximize the realization of your productivity potential.
Self-loathing? Disgust with one's fundamental nature?
Again, and I've asked you 9 million times, but there's no point in keep asking, exactly how are any of those things bad things in the world? Exactly how has people recognizing the waste or squander or irresponsibility or recklessness or sloppiness or selfishness of their behavior? Show me examples of people realizing the nastiness of selfishness has done the world harm. Show me examples of that, please.
Misanthropy? Is it my fault that I'm a human being?
Again, that's this idea that you are something other than the mixture of perception, right? So you have the reptilian needs, the biological needs, food, sex, ego. Ego blends into the more advanced mammalian brain. So now you're talking about things that are a little more extended, like love of wife, love of children, attachments, how to the flight fight kind of crap. All of that gets more nuanced. Okay, the addictions start rolling in, but it's still just conditioned psychology. And even when you're conditioned to sort of enjoy something, you can understand that enjoying it must come at some sort of efficiency, that you can't just rape the woman. And then you have an intellect that can eviscerate any of it with a few thoughts. With a few thoughts, it can sit there and disengage you from your bigotries and your prejudices and your preferences, because it can make it realizable. It gives you the vision to see without the skin on it, without the color, without the attitude, without the headlessness. I can change this image and make it into something else by my knowledge, by my understanding. So even though I might have some ooey gooey personal feeling about babies, and saying, ooh, yeah, I want to make one of these things, it looks like me, and it'd be like me, and blah, 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 and these delusions, and then I can contextualize that and understand that, oh no, this is what it really is. It's a molecule replicating. It can create a compulsion inside of me, and I can find some other way to jerk off.
Is it my fault that I have a nature? That I have attributes?
Yeah, it would be your fault if you think any part of your nature has complete liberty and rule. Yes, it's your fault if you think your lizard nature should be uncaged, and if you think your gorilla nature should be unleashed. Yes, if you think those things are sensible things for your intelligence to do, and your intelligence should just sit back and let itself be a hammer for the ape, and let itself be a bomb for the lizard, well then, yeah, you're an idiot. You're not very smart.
Is it anyone's fault for being what they are?
It's their fault, yes, if they can't satisfy their addiction in some sort of reasonable manner. So yes, if I'm a heroin addict, I can go get a job at some soup kitchen or some other kind of place, make enough money to pay for my heroin, or I can decide to go out on the street, whack people over the head with a brick, and steal their money. Yes, it's my fault if I choose whapping people over the head and stealing their money. If I think my life, my heroin, is worth their life, then I've committed a fault in logic because of my preposterous ego or whatever else is running inside of me. But obviously I've made an insipidly stupid value exchange. So if you're making insipidly stupid value exchanges, if you think you are competent to play God, then yes, I think the addiction has soiled your brain, and you have shit for brains. You have now got shit in your brain, and you're fucked to be a lousy, rotten, stinking asshole.
If we're born drunk, it doesn't make any sense at all to walk around handing out tickets for public intoxication and DWI.
Well, again, that's just silly. We're born selfish and we control it all the time, and we oblige people to control it all the time. We oblige people to have manners and, conduct themselves in a certain manner that is inconsistent with what they want to do. I mean, please, let's not get totally silly. I mean, we all want, to ride on the naked orgy bus. Okay, as males maybe. But yeah, we know that we have to contain all that crap and be civilized, because we know that it just won't work out. Selfishness doesn't win.
When the cop handing you your ticket has whiskey on his breath, it's hard to say that he's got the moral high ground.
Right. So this is just like saying the shoplifter has no right to tell the serial killer to stop serial killing. I mean, it's just silly. Yes, the fact that we're all not perfectly ethical, unselfish things, the fact that there are no real perfect human beings, does not mean that we don't have an obligation to measure each other's conduct and to recognize squander and waste and extravagance and selfishness and call it what the fuck it is: irresponsible, reckless, sloppy, and unacceptable. I mean, it's just silly. You're making a silly argument.
This isn't really meant as something aimed at Amanda, but she brought this to my attention just by the title of her video. I've always liked that metaphor, the drunk driving metaphor. Unfortunately, it falls down. It doesn't work.
No, it works just fine. Recklessness is recklessness. And you're an advocate for recklessness. And that's why you're a horrible, monstrous, evil person. This whole idea, you're advocating for just lizard and ape behavior in a world blighted by lizard and ape behavior. The entire reason why the human race itself, I mean, the nature can't be fixed, okay? That just can't be fixed, okay? Cheetahs have been made to chase down, alligators have been made to chomp. The disease microbes, the biological organisms themselves are made to self-destruct, to age and die. You can't fix that game. That game is insidious. But this human thing had some potential. But it only has potential if humans are going to rise above being lizards and apes. If you're just going to sit there and advocate for being dumb animals, then you really have nothing. You have absolutely nothing. You're just another name for crocodile. And you really have no excuse. To say that this is the way the biology made me just makes my argument for me. It just points out that, well, look what the biology makes. Great white sharks and alligators and crocodiles and selfish son of a bitches. So it's obviously can't produce anything of any kind of grace or dignity. Because even the things capable of it won't dance that dance. They say, I don't want to do something elegant and beautiful. No, I want to be a fucking asshole. I have to be. You can't stop me. I mean, fuck you.
Why? Because we're all drunk, and we cannot be non-drunk.
Yeah, it's a silly argument, right? I mean, you all know that's a silly argument, right? You really do, right? You know that people can not procreate. People who procreate stop procreating. So let's not pretend we can't not do it, because most people on Earth are doing that regularly. So it's just silly to say you can't not do it. Silly. Alright. So anyway, I mean, this really is not complicated. We have the choice. We can buy sensible car, we can buy insensible car. We can eat humanely prepared food, we can eat inhumanely prepared food. These are all the choices. There's no I have to do that. I have to do the worst possible thing. I have to do the most expensive thing. There's none of that. There's no such mechanism. So it's just a lie. You can be addicted responsibly or you can be addicted irresponsibly. And that's drunk driving. When you do it by volition, by intent, because you've eradicated the obligation to think, eradicated the obligation to recognize the liabilities and the dangers and the risks, and that's what this guy has done. He's advocated not thinking. Yes, that is a willful putting of the liquor to your lips. The lies to your lips. So anyway, this is just so, it's just these nihilists. Ugh.